I took the headline of this entire kind of setup to be what does diversity look like in 2016, and thought that I would bring to bear the kind of political side of that, talking from my own experience. So kind of came up with this idea of diversity and representation, because a lot of the times that diversity is invoked in politics, it's to do with representation. Are certain views being represented? Are certain people, certain populations being represented? So I'm now going to revert to iPad. Diversity is an interesting word and a very interesting concept. Today I'm going to talk about what diversity within the political sphere can mean and the challenges that can occur. I'm specifically going to focus on the difference between the abstract concept of diversity and the difficulty of translating that abstract concept into real life. I have to say at the very beginning of this that I don't know how many of you have watched TED Talks online. They were quite buzzy when I was at university, and a lot of the time it was people who had spent years honing their arguments, coming up, like writing books on things and trying to give their audience the idea of a brand new life that they can take up and leave the hall skipping into kind of utopia. Sadly, that's not what I've got. I think this is a really, really complex thing to talk about, and there are lots of different things, and there are actually things I'm going to talk about that I don't actually know the answer to. So what I'm aiming to do today is give you a bit of the background to it, so you can go away and come up with your own opinions on actually what you guys think about this. So, to start with the abstract, to have a diverse body of people, one would expect it to include representatives from a number of social, cultural, economic groups, and include members from ethnic or religious minority groups. Whilst the definition busies itself with the presentation that this diverse group of people have actually assembled, the importance of diversity lies in the idea that each of these people will bring their own views, opinions, and experiences to the table, thus making the end product, whatever that might be, more enlightened, more inclusive, and more open-minded. Who doesn't want to live in an enlightened, open-minded, and inclusive society? It sounds a bit like a no-brainer. So why does the abstract concept remain just that, abstract? A lot is made of the number of white men in politics, and I think that's rightfully so. In a House of Commons that comprises currently of 649 MPs, there is one seat currently vacant following the devastating murder of Jo Cox. 192, that's 29.5% of those MPs are women, and 41, that's 6.3%, are not white or from a BME background. Given that women are 50% of the population and that BME make up about 13% of the population, it feels like the abstract has not quite entered into reality. And gender and ethnicity are just two differentials that we could pick upon. We could choose age, religion, disability, educational background, social background, the list goes on. So how do we make this abstract a reality? This is where I'm going to throw a couple of stats at you, so please do bear with me. If 150 MPs who sit in our House of Commons match the diversity of our country, there would be 559 MPs who would be white British versus the 609 that are in reality. There'd be 14.95 MPs who would be 85 years old or over versus none in the current system. There'd be 329.55 MPs who were women versus the 192 as previously mentioned in the current parliament. 45.5 MPs would have gone to independent school versus the 217 MPs who currently went to independent school in the House of Commons. And 31.2 MPs would be a Muslim versus 13 in reality. Whilst I'm tempted to skip over whether it would be the bottom or the top half of the MP that went to independent school, or the fifth of the MP who was a Muslim, these scenarios showed the kind of crude nature of just taking an abstract idea and trying to impose it onto society. But to me, this exercise also raises further issues. It's returning again to the definition at the beginning, which busied itself with presentation. It's not just what people look like or where they come from, it's what they contribute. Whilst having different opinions and experiences can contribute to a more open-minded outcome, does not having them mean that the outcome is the opposite. The point here is that the reason that these 650 MPs are so important is because we live in a representative democracy. MPs are elected at a general election or a by-election to go to Westminster to represent their constituents. No matter who that MP is or what their ethnicity, gender or religion is, they go to Westminster to represent all of their constituents, whoever they are and whatever their background. That to me is basically the fundamental basis of our democracy, that you can go to a person that you have voted for or not voted for. They are your constituency MP and they have to take up your cause. Now, you could argue that in general, the collective of MPs needs to be more diverse to better reflect the makeup of our population. And I think that that is an opinion that lots of people would agree with. But if you talk to an individual MP who is currently in the House of Commons, they would argue until they were blue in the face that they represent all of their constituents, no matter what their background, no matter who they are, or whether they voted for them or not. To put it another way, we recently had a very, very diverse electoral makeup. Sorry, I missed a paragraph. In another way, we recently had a very diversely representative act of direct democracy with the referendum on whether the UK should leave the EU. Everyone had a chance to have their say. Everyone had a vote. Even with the extremely diverse electoral makeup that there have been, arguments subsequently have kind of focused on the old disagreeing with the young or the cities disagreeing with the countryside. It shows that even where there has been a mass diversity within decision-making progress, that doesn't always end up with what the consensus is as the right answer. Now, just as a side note, I know that the big elephant in the room here is saying that everyone had a vote. Probably a couple of you in the audience who are pretty angry that you didn't. Angry that the decision is going to impact you more than it's going to impact many of the people that did vote for a certain way. But that is, in my argument, almost part of it. It's how do you represent everyone? And when you go to that mass representative direct democracy, it still didn't quite reflect the answer that lots of people wanted. Now, I want to move on now to the thing that motivates me in my career, and that is the equality of opportunity. I think that the lack of diversity in public life, be that politics, business, law, the arts, fundamentally comes down to that being a symptom of what is a wider illness. And that is the lack of opportunity to certain groups to access those worlds of politics, the arts, law, business, whatever that might be. A great example of this is applying to Oxford or Cambridge. It's been well known that if you have a teacher that went to Oxford or Cambridge, they can share their experience with you. They can demystify what can seem a completely bizarre and archaic application process, to explain to you what colleges are, JCRs, MCRs, kind of why people wear gowns, etc., etc. It also gives you someone that has been there, has done that. You can quiz, you can question. It's the same if you want to go into any kind of profession. If you know someone in that profession, you can ask them questions. Basically, you can see the route that you need to follow to get from where you are to where you want to be. To go back to the political sphere, if people don't know how to get into politics, it's unsurprisingly that those people do not make up more of the number of politicians. Basically, if only white men apply, then only white men will get in. I think that the change we need to see is a focus of all of our efforts on making the process of becoming an MP, the process of actually accessing this thing, more transparent, more accessible, so that anybody that thinks they might want to do it can see the route they need to follow to get there. My argument would then follow that if there was true equality of opportunity, we would become a truly equal society, and that we'd be able to make decisions on purely a meritocratic basis. This approach may take time, but it enables everyone that gets to the top to know that they are there on the basis of ability, not because of the characteristics that they happen to have. This is where opinions will start to diverge, and it'd be very interesting to hear what you guys have to say or what you think about this. Because there are beliefs out there, and I'm very sympathetic to them, that actually those barriers of entry can never properly be removed for everyone. There is another opinion, which is the equality of outcome. The outcome of the decision-making process needs to reflect the diversity in the application. that actually what things look like are important, and therefore the system should be made to reflect the diversity of society. There is a third middle way, if you will, which is the argument that the equality of opportunity is all very well, but it cannot ensure diversity. If we want to see the effects of action in our own lifetimes, we have to put a rocket booster up something to make it happen. You give more positive examples, like a black American president or a Muslim London mayor, and that breaks down barriers and shows people from those groups what is possible. Basically, if you care what something looks like for a generation, that will then ingrain itself into society, and you can move into a situation where meritocracy wins the day and the things go to the best people, whoever they are. Whilst my problem is I kind of think that sometimes these arguments treat the symptom, not the cause. Because as I've explained, I think the cause is really in the access and the equality of opportunity that exists out there. Here I come back to the start about not knowing exactly what I think. If we want to make the country more diverse, there is a simple solution. We could introduce quotas. We could literally say that the number of seats in the House of Commons, or positions on company boards, or seats on the Supreme or county courts have to be held by people with certain characteristics. You could choose from a list, as long as you're armed, what those characteristics could be. The examples of this happening internationally have mainly been with gender. There are a number of legislatures across the world who stipulate in law the percentage of seats in their legislature that can be held by women. Of about 2006, gender quotas in national parliaments existed in about 40 countries, with an additional 50 countries having voluntary quotas put in place by major political parties. For example, they might use an all-women shortlist to choose the candidates that go into their elections. I completely sympathise with quotas. I completely see what they are trying to achieve, but for me, the cons to them currently outweigh the pros. For me, the big one is that quotas imply that politicians are elected because of their gender, not because of their qualifications, and that because of that, more qualified candidates are perhaps pushed to the side. I would read out all of the pros and cons for each side to you, but it might be a bit long. But if anybody's actually interested in it, there are some really great websites out there. The quotaproject.org is a project run by the University of Stockholm and the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and it gives some great stats and some interesting briefings if you are interested. Just briefly, to touch on, I want to give the two other problems I have with quotas. One, they don't translate particularly easily into our parliamentary system. As I said before, I think that the relationship between an MP and their constituents is the fundamental of our democracy. And the difficulty is, it doesn't really work with first past the post quotas. Now, only really political geeks like me will think about electoral systems, and I wouldn't bore you with all of it, but just it doesn't quite work. I wouldn't want to disrupt what I think is the most important relationship in politics. Number two, I think quotas work well where there's a binary choice. I mean, you're men or women, but become harder when you're trying to achieve a greater sense of diversity. Put simply, they are quite a blunt stick if you want to change things. That said, I'm willing to concede that my view on quotas or more prescribed action in positive discrimination may change. I have listened to a number of women who have ideologically kind of thought the same about quotas as I have, but have expected this change to happen organically through a number of decades, and coming to the later parts of their lives are frustrated that they have not seen that. And so their view on quotas have switched more to a kind of proactive stance on them. The number of women in Parliament is going up at each election, and the number of MPs from an ethnic minority is also going up. Because of the way that the system is set up, you can argue that they are the ones who are there in those positions because of their abilities and their qualifications. For me, sacrificing that for the presentation of more diversity through a quota system would be a loss. In conclusion, it really is a bit like an essay, sorry. In conclusion, I think that the importance of diversity lies in the different views and the experience it can bring to bear on a situation. But for me, you get to that position by relentlessly focusing on the equality of opportunity and breaking down the barriers of entry for people. But while I think that that will always be the most important thing in my view, I will constantly revise and review the situation to see if real progress is being made. And if it's not, then let's do something kind of bigger and more proper about it. I want to live in a society where all people are judged on their abilities, whilst where they come from and who they are will inform and impact on those abilities, they should not define them. At the end of the day, we're all individuals and we should be treated as such. To be treated as anything other than that disregards everything that makes us great. That is basically the end of my spiel. I'm quite keen if anybody found any of that interesting, or if you have any views about your own kind of things. This is something that I personally have thought about on and off since I was your age, if not before, and I've still not quite come to the end of it. Not quite sure what I think the answer is. I just know it's not necessarily an easy question. I remember when I sat down and first started thinking about how to answer what does diversity look like in 2016, I was going to be, oh, it looks okay, things are kind of going in the right direction, but we're not there yet as a kind of one-line answer. And it was only when I sat down and kind of began to unpack all of these different things which were around this topic that I realised that it was going to take me a bit longer to write a kind of longer speech. So it's not easy, it's not kind of an easy answer for anything, and it'd be really interesting to hear what you guys happen to think about diversity in politics, or, you know, what's more important within the kind of hierarchy, if you will, between representation, diversity, and equality.